Have you ever wondered why some people seem obsessed with bringing you down, even when you've done nothing to them? It's like your very existence irritates something inside them. What they don't realize is this: when you're one of God's chosen ones, you're not just another person. They're not fighting you. They're fighting divine protection. And here's the warning most ignore. If they fail to take your life, God can take theirs. Yes, you heard that right. This isn't superstition. It's scripture-backed spiritual reality. We're about to dive into truths so deep, so powerful, that they'll shake your understanding of why certain people around you are falling, fading, and losing everything. The Bible says in Proverbs 26:27, "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it." That's not a metaphor, it's a divine law. And in this video, we're going to uncover 10 spiritual revelations that prove God's chosen are never truly in danger, even when it looks like the enemy is winning. So if you've been under attack, if people have tried to slander your name, steal your peace, or sabotage your purpose, this message is for you. You're going to see how God uses silence as strategy, how he turns prison into promotion, how he flips the roles in an instant, and how your enemies end up burying themselves with the very weapons they formed against you. And at the end of this video, I'll reveal the one moment, the instant shift, where God's justice comes without warning and changes everything. Let me ask you, have you felt like you've been targeted for no reason? Like something bigger is going on behind the scenes? Then stay right here. Don't scroll. Don't blink. Because what you're about to hear might be the exact spiritual clarity you've been crying out for. If you believe in God, if you trust the Bible and you walk in faith through Jesus Christ, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. You're about to discover what really happens when people try to play with God's chosen. Let's go deep, all the way to the end. They thought they had you cornered, didn't they? All their plans, the whispers in the dark, the fake smiles and backdoor conversations. They thought you wouldn't see it coming. But what they didn't realize is, when someone is chosen by God, they're not just walking around with human protection. No, they're wrapped in the divine covering of the Most High. That's the kind of protection that doesn't blink, doesn't sleep, and never loses track. Proverbs 26:27 lays it plain: "Whoever digs a pit will fall into it." And those pits, they were never for you. That's the thing people forget when they go against someone walking in faith, someone covered by the Word, someone who walks hand in hand with Jesus Christ. The chosen ones don't have to retaliate. They don't have to scheme or shout or stoop to the level of their enemies. You ever notice how Jesus, when faced with false accusations, stayed silent? He didn't argue. He knew his Father in heaven would speak louder than any lie. And that's the same confidence the chosen carry. It's not arrogance, it's holy assurance. You don't need to fight battles that God already won. While others rely on influence and manipulation, you rest in the promises of the Bible. That's your shield. That's your sword. And that's more powerful than any weapon forged against you. Let's be real for a second. Life ain't always fair. The attacks come from people you loved, people you trusted, and it hurts. But here's where the real revelation kicks in. Every betrayal, every setup, every pit they dig, it becomes evidence. Evidence of who you are in God. If you weren't chosen, the enemy wouldn't bother. But because you carry something from heaven, hell wants to silence it. But guess what? It can't. Because Jesus Christ already declared your victory. On that cross, that's not just faith, it's undeniable spiritual reality. And sometimes it's hard to see the protection while you're in the middle of the storm. It feels like nothing's working in your favor. But let me remind you of something. Just because you don't see God moving doesn't mean he's not. You're not walking alone. You're walking surrounded. Psalm 91 talks about angels being commanded to guard you in all your ways. That's not poetic fluff. It's a literal promise from God. That means every step you take in faith is guided, guarded, and governed by heaven itself. You might not see the trap avoided, but trust me, God saw it and made sure you never fell. So don't waste your energy watching your enemies. Don't lose sleep replaying their words. They're not fighting you, they're fighting what's covering you. And when you're covered by God, you don't fall into pits. You watch your Enemies trip over their own snares. The same ones who tried to bury you will witness your elevation. That's not revenge. It's justice. And when justice is served by God, it's always righteous, always timely, and always complete. Now let's move forward, because what comes next will open your eyes even more. The mistake they made was thinking power equals protection. They thought titles, wealth, and influence could shield them. But spiritual warfare doesn't bow to earthly thrones. That's the miscalculation, assuming that because someone's got status, they've got security. But when you're dealing with someone chosen by God, you're not wrestling with flesh and blood anymore. You're messing with divine authority, backed by the creator of the universe. And let me tell you, money can't buy that kind of power. It's the kind that doesn't show up on news headlines but moves mountains in silence. It's unseen but unstoppable. That's the kind of power protecting you. Remember Pharaoh? He had armies, pyramids, gold, and the fear of nations. But he didn't have what Moses had: favor. And favor from God trumps every human advantage. Pharaoh underestimated that. He mocked Moses. He mocked the God of the Bible. And what happened? The Red Sea swallowed his pride. That wasn't just a historical event. It was a divine message. You don't play games with God's chosen. The same story repeats itself in the battlefield with David and Goliath. Goliath had size, weapons, experience. David had a slingshot and faith. Guess who walked away victorious? Now think about Haman in the book of Esther. He was the king's favorite. He had access, manipulation, and a hatred for the people of God. But Haman didn't realize that Esther wasn't standing alone. She was backed by a fasting people, a praying nation, and a God who never sleeps. The gallows he built for Mordecai ended up being his own noose. That's what happens when you miscalculate divine power. What was meant to destroy the chosen becomes the very tool of the enemy's downfall. That's not luck. That's God showing his hand in broad daylight. The protection over your life is invisible. That's why your enemies don't understand, why their plans keep failing. They don't see the angels surrounding your house. They don't hear the prayers whispered in secret. They don't know about the tears you cried on your knees or the nights you spent reading the Bible, asking Jesus Christ for strength. They only see the surface. But you, my friend, walk with something they can't measure: divine backup. And when God is your bodyguard, even the most strategic attacks become wasted effort. So let them boast about their resources. Let them flaunt their influence. Because at the end of the day, power that isn't rooted in God is nothing but smoke. It looks impressive until the fire of heaven shows up. You don't need to outmatch them in resources. You just need to remain in faith. Stay humble. Keep your heart pure. And remember, the strength of the chosen lies not in what they hold, but in who holds them. Now brace yourself, because next we'll dive into how their evil intentions don't just fail, they backfire. Have you ever seen a boomerang in action? You throw it with force, expecting it to hit something, but instead, it circles back. That's exactly how it works in the spiritual realm when people try to harm a child of God. The evil they launch against you, whether it's slander, sabotage, betrayal, doesn't vanish into thin air. It circles back, multiplied, sharpened by the justice of heaven. That's not superstition. That's the word. Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap." And when someone sows wickedness toward one of God's chosen, that harvest comes back bitter. That's the divine boomerang effect. Take Joseph, for example. His own brothers, fueled by envy, sold him into slavery. Imagine the betrayal, family turning into enemies. But what they didn't know was that God wasn't just watching, he was orchestrating. Every step Joseph took, from the pit to Potiphar's house, from prison to Pharaoh's palace, was guided by divine hands. And when the time came, those same brothers who once threw him away stood before him, trembling, needing help. What they meant for evil, God used for good. Genesis 50:20. That's the beauty of divine justice. It transforms betrayal into breakthrough and pain into platform. Now here's something deep that many overlook. Joseph didn't retaliate. He didn't expose his brothers when he first saw them. He didn't scream revenge. He stayed quiet, observant, discerning. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. When you keep quiet, you give space for God to speak loud. When you step back, you allow Jesus Christ to step forward. And when he moves, he doesn't just restore, you get elevated in a way no human power could have arranged. Joseph's silence allowed the justice of God to tell the story without interference. And that story still preaches today. The world teaches you to fight back, clap back, get even. But the Bible teaches the opposite. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. When you remain still in the face of injustice, you're not being passive. You're making room for heaven to intervene. That doesn't mean you let people walk over you. It means you trust that God's timing is better than your impulse. And when God responds, it's never partial. It's always full, always fair, always final. Faith in action often looks like restraint, because that restraint shows you believe in a higher court. So if you're in a moment where it feels like injustice is winning, pause. Don't panic. Don't overreact. You're not forgotten. You're being positioned. What they sent out against you is already on its way back. Not because you're vengeful, but because God is just. And when God takes over the fight, your only job is to stay faithful. Keep walking in righteousness. Keep your heart clean. And prepare yourself for the moment when the tables turn. Because next, we'll uncover how the very ego that pushed your enemies to attack you will be the same ego that leads to their fall. Pride has a smell to it. It's loud, it's heavy, and eventually it sinks the person carrying it. Your enemies weren't just after you. They were inflated by ego, convinced they had power over your destiny. They looked at you and saw vulnerability, but failed to see what was covering you. The anointing of God. That's what ego does. It blinds people to the hand of the divine. Proverbs 16:18 says it best. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. The higher they raise themselves up in arrogance, the harder they fall when God humbles them. And that fall, it's never quiet. What they never understood is that when someone walks by faith, they walk with invisible backup. But ego doesn't let people perceive that. Ego is loud. It's impulsive. It makes enemies underestimate you and overestimate themselves. Think about Goliath. He mocked David, laughed at his youth, ridiculed his weapon. Goliath's ego made him believe he couldn't lose. But it took just one stone guided by God to shatter that pride. The same way your enemies laughed at your simplicity, your quietness, your small beginnings. They forgot what the Bible says in Psalm 147:6. The Lord sustains the humble but casts the wicked to the ground. The humble rise. The proud collapse. Ego never sees consequences coming. That's why Haman built the gallows with a smile on his face. He thought he was in control. But what ego doesn't account for is divine reversal. James 4:6 says, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. That word opposes is strong. God actively resists the proud. He doesn't ignore them. He doesn't tolerate them. He moves against them. That's why you never have to waste your energy proving yourself. When your life is anchored in Jesus Christ, the same people trying to bury you will end up digging their own graves. You see, there's something holy about walking in humility. It doesn't mean weakness, it means alignment. When you humble yourself, you're positioning yourself under the mighty hand of God, 1 Peter 5:6. And he promises to exalt you in due time. Your enemies, they chose elevation without submission, and that always leads to exposure. That's the divine order. God lifts the low and brings down the high. So while they were chasing platforms and attention, you were chasing righteousness, and heaven saw it all. Your tears, your prayers, your obedience, it's all part of the rising. And theirs, it's part of the fall. So here's the twist. Your silence didn't mean defeat, it meant wisdom. While they were boasting, you were building. While they were watching you, God was watching them. The ego that blinded them will now become their downfall. It's not your hand that brings them down. It's God's justice, pure and clean. And next, we'll explore how that same justice turns even a prison cell into a pulpit, revealing that God doesn't waste any opportunity to show His glory. Here's something most people miss. When God allows His chosen ones to be thrown into a pit, a prison, or even public shame, it's not abandonment. It's preparation. It's staging. What looks like punishment from a human perspective often becomes a divine performance. God doesn't hide His justice, He broadcasts it. And sometimes the clearest way to prove His authority is to allow the proud to fall loudly and publicly. Take King Nebuchadnezzar, for example. A king who looked around and said, "Look at what I built." But God humbled him, made him crawl on all fours, stripped him of his sanity, and only after acknowledging the sovereignty of God did he regain his throne. Daniel 4. That wasn't just a lesson for him, it was a divine display to everyone watching. Jail is not always about chains. Sometimes it's a spotlight. When Joseph was in prison, it seemed like a setback. But in God's hands, prison became the bridge to the palace. The same can happen to you. Maybe you're feeling restricted, trapped by lies, slander, manipulation. But don't miss the bigger picture. What was meant to break you is about to broadcast your breakthrough. Because when God is the director, even a dungeon becomes a doorway. That's not fantasy. That's faith in motion. And when your story shifts, it won't be in secret. It'll be public, undeniable, and soaked in the glory of Jesus Christ. And let's not forget Paul and Silas. They were beaten, locked up, humiliated. But at midnight, they prayed and sang hymns. And what happened? A divine earthquake. Not just their chains, but everyone's chains fell off. Acts 16:25-26. You see, when God uses jail as a stage, it's not just for you, it's for everybody watching. Your enemies, your friends, the onlookers, the skeptics, they all get front row seats to witness the power of a God who defies logic. That's how He works. He uses what the world calls rock bottom as the perfect platform to lift you up and to bring others to faith in the process. And there's something deeply personal about that, because sometimes God has to isolate you before He elevates you. He'll allow confinement so that when the door opens, everyone will know it was His hand. There won't be explanations. No one will be able to say it was connections or luck. It will be so clearly God that people who once doubted the Bible will begin to believe. And those who tried to ruin you will be forced to watch you rise, not in pride but in purpose. That's how powerful the justice of God is. So if you feel like you're in a prison right now, mentally, emotionally, socially, don't lose hope. That cell is not the end. It's a setup. God is about to use what looked like your lowest place to prove that His word never fails. And next we're going to talk about how their plans to destroy you, yes, even assassination-level plots, can't succeed when you're covered by heaven. When you're chosen by God, the enemy doesn't just dislike you, he wants to erase you. And not just spiritually. Sometimes the attack feels like it's meant to destroy your very existence, your reputation, your future, your peace. That's because the enemy knows something most people overlook. You carry something eternal. You're not just a person, you're a vessel. You walk with the name of Jesus Christ over your life. And when the enemy realizes he can't stop your purpose, he shifts gears and tries to eliminate your presence. But here's the unshakable truth: when you're marked by faith, no plot can prosper. Daniel was faithful. He wasn't rebellious, he wasn't arrogant. He simply refused to compromise his worship. And what did that get him? A den full of lions. From the outside, that looked like the end. But God turned the death sentence into a divine spectacle. He didn't remove Daniel from the situation. He showed up inside of it. That's how God works with His chosen. He doesn't always block the attack, but He makes sure it backfires. While Daniel slept with lions, the very men who plotted his death were later thrown into the same pit. Only difference is they didn't walk out. That's the power of God's justice. And then there's Haman. Oh, Haman. The man was obsessed with destroying Mordecai. One man. He built gallows, twisted laws, manipulated kings, all to end a life. But when you come against someone walking in alignment with God's purpose, you're not just playing politics, you're declaring war against heaven. And heaven never loses. Haman ended up swinging from the very structure he created. That's divine irony. That's biblical reversal. And that's what happens when you try to assassinate someone God is elevating. The weapons formed may look sharp, but they will not prosper. Isaiah 54:17. Now I know you felt it, that heaviness, that sense that someone is actively working behind the scenes to ruin you. It could be at work, within your own family, or in places where you should have felt safe. But let me remind you, what the enemy calls a trap, God turns into a testimony. The moments when you felt most attacked were actually stages being built for your promotion. You don't need to defend yourself, your survival is the proof. And every failed plot becomes a new platform to declare the power of God, the truth of the Bible, and the victory in Jesus Christ. So next time the arrows come flying, don't just duck, worship. Praise in the middle of the plan. Thank God, while the weapon is still being formed, because you already know how the story ends. You're not the victim, you're the vessel. And no matter how elaborate their schemes, no matter how long they plot or how hard they push, if God is for you, who can be against you? Now let's keep going, because next we're going to see what happens when the roles reverse and those who once had power end up needing mercy. Isn't it wild how God flips the script? One day you're overlooked, rejected, underestimated, and then suddenly the very people who dismissed you need your help. That's not coincidence, that's divine reversal. That's God reminding the world that his power doesn't move according to human hierarchy. He doesn't elevate based on popularity or prestige. He promotes the faithful, the ones who walk in obedience even in obscurity. And when the time comes, he shifts the entire dynamic. The first become last, and the last, they step into the spotlight covered in glory and faith. Look at Joseph. Betrayed by his own blood, sold like merchandise, forgotten in a dungeon. If that were the end of the story, it would be tragic. But God doesn't end on tragedy. He finishes in triumph. One divine dream-interpreting moment, and Joseph goes from prisoner to prime minister. And here's the kicker. The same brothers who tried to bury him had to bow before him. They didn't even recognize the man they once abandoned. That's what happens when God breathes on your life. He doesn't just restore, he transforms. The pain becomes power, the past becomes purpose, and those who tried to control your fate end up witnessing your rise. Now pause and think. How many times have you been in situations where someone tried to dominate you, intimidate you, silence you? Maybe it was a boss, a parent, a leader, someone who thought their authority gave them license to play God in your life. But here's the truth they overlooked. You're not operating under their system. You're under the government of heaven. And when God flips the roles, it's not out of spite. It's to demonstrate that he alone is sovereign. That your story is authored by the King of Kings, and no earthly power has the right to edit his script. The Bible is full of these reversals. Think of David, just a shepherd, ignored even by his own father when the prophet came looking for the next king. And yet he was God's choice. Jesus himself came not in royal robes, but in humility, born in a manger. Why? Because God's way always disrupts the expected. He chooses the lowly to shame the proud. That's not just a pattern, it's a promise. When you stay faithful, even in silence, God will honor you in ways no title or platform could ever match. That's why it's crucial to remain in prayer, grounded in the Word, and walking in forgiveness, because your moment is coming. And here's the beauty of it all. When God reverses the roles, he doesn't just elevate you. He humbles them, but not to destroy, to redeem. Sometimes the same people who tried to control your life will end up being changed through your life. They'll see Jesus Christ in you. They'll hear wisdom in your voice, and they'll come to know God not through a sermon, but through your transformation. And next, we're going to talk about something even deeper. How the silence of God isn't absence. It's divine strategy. There's something about silence that makes us uncomfortable, especially when we're crying out to God. We pray, we fast, we plead, and sometimes heaven seems quiet. No signs, no wonders, no word, just silence. But what many forget is that silence isn't the same as absence. In fact, silence is often the setup. It's strategic. God's silence is not a retreat, it's restraint. It's the calm before a holy storm. And if you're walking by faith and not by sight, you begin to recognize that when God is silent, something powerful is being positioned. You're not being ignored. You're being prepared. Take Jesus Christ. When he stood before Pilate, he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He was silent. And that silence shook the system. It wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Because God knew what was coming. Resurrection, vindication, and the tearing of the veil. The silence wasn't the end of the story. It was the part where heaven was loading. Just like in Job's life, after all the losses, the pain, the confusion, Job sat in silence. But then came the whirlwind. And in that whirlwind, God spoke. Restored, multiplied. Silence was just the hallway to his double portion. And let's not forget Pharaoh. How many times did he challenge God? He hardened his heart, mocked Moses, tightened his grip on the Israelites. And for a while it seemed like nothing was happening. No fire from heaven, no immediate judgment, but oh, when God moved, it was swift, undeniable, and final. The Red Sea didn't need to part 10 times, just once. That's all it took to make history remember that silence is never a sign of surrender. It's the pause before the power, the delay before the deliverance. The silence of God is often him allowing pride, ego, and evil to expose themselves completely, so that when he moves, no one can say it wasn't him. This truth is hard to swallow when you're in the middle of the waiting. Your heart screams for answers. Your mind runs in circles. But the Bible is clear in Ecclesiastes 3:7. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak. God knows exactly when to speak. And when he does, he doesn't just address the problem. He rewrites the outcome. So if you're in a silent season, don't misinterpret it. It's not punishment, it's precision. God is setting the stage, aligning hearts, shaking hidden things loose, because when he speaks, everything changes. So what do you do while heaven is quiet? You worship louder, you serve deeper, you stay rooted in the Bible, you remind yourself daily of the promises in faith. Because eventually that silence will break, and when it does, you'll realize it wasn't a void. It was a vault, storing the victory. And next, we'll uncover the sobering truth that while your enemies tried to destroy your life, what they'll lose in return is far greater. Their legacy. There's a chilling reality many overlook. When someone tries to destroy the life of a chosen one, they end up sacrificing something far more permanent, their legacy. A reputation, once poisoned by envy and wickedness, rarely recovers. And here's what makes this even more profound. While they were plotting your downfall, you were busy building something eternal, a life anchored in faith, a testimony forged in fire. And the moment they touched what was God's, they set in motion the loss of what they hoped would last beyond them. Because when God marks you, any attack against your life echoes into the legacy of your enemy. Let's return to Joseph. His brothers wanted to erase him from their story. They couldn't stand the dreams, the favor, the light he carried. So they sold him, lied about him, erased him from their memory. But God didn't just protect Joseph's life. He expanded his influence. And the brothers? They had to live with the legacy of what they'd done, at least until restoration came. See, when people try to break you, they usually believe they're ending something. But in God's hands, they're actually activating something. Joseph's suffering didn't just lead to personal blessing, it fed nations. That's the power of walking with Jesus Christ. Your pain becomes provision for others. And then there's Paul, once Saul, the persecutor of the early church. His mission, to destroy those who followed Jesus. But God had other plans. He didn't just stop Saul, he transformed him. And what happened to Saul's old legacy? It crumbled, forgotten, replaced. Paul's new life, shaped by grace and rooted in the Bible, birthed letters we still read today. That's redemption. But here's the warning. Not everyone gets that chance. Some enemies of God's people never turn. They double down. And in trying to eliminate someone chosen, they seal their own legacy in shame. That's not vengeance. It's Consequence. Divine consequence. The truth is, we all leave something behind. The question is, what? When you walk in obedience, your legacy is peace, honor, faith. It ripples through generations. When you walk in opposition to God's will, especially against those He has chosen, you're remembered not for your victories, but for your rebellion. That's why Psalm 112:6 says, "Surely the righteous will never be shaken. They will be remembered forever." Not because they were perfect, but because they were faithful. And that's what your enemies didn't count on. Your faith was your seed. And seeds, when buried, don't die. They multiply. So don't worry about their noise, their slander, their attempts to block your name. Legacy isn't built by loud voices, it's built by lasting fruit. Keep showing love, keep choosing forgiveness, keep walking in the path of Jesus Christ. Because while others are chasing recognition, you're building remembrance. Eternal, holy, untouchable. And now we reach the part where everything can change in an instant. Get ready, because what happens next is sudden, unstoppable, and undeniably divine. Sometimes it feels like justice is taking too long. We watch the wicked thrive, the proud rise, and the righteous struggle. But here's the thing about God's justice. It may take time to manifest, but when it comes, it's instantaneous, swift, unstoppable, final. You can go from overlooked to overblessed in a moment. And those who mocked, schemed, and doubted, they won't even have time to react, because when God says now, everything shifts. That's not fantasy. That's the pattern all over the Bible. Belshazzar thought he had time to party, to mock the sacred, to desecrate what belonged to God. But one message written by a divine hand changed everything overnight. Daniel 5. He saw the writing, he heard the judgment, and he fell instantly. Pharaoh thought he was untouchable. He had defied God time and time again. Plague after plague came, and still, he hardened his heart. But when the final blow came, it was sudden. The death of the firstborn, the cries in Egypt, it all happened in a night. One night changed history. One divine act shattered a dynasty. That's how God moves when His time arrives. And here's the truth. Your time is coming too. You've endured the process, walked by faith, trusted through silence, and now you're standing on the edge of sudden transformation. That thing you've been praying for, fighting for, waiting for, it can shift in a breath. And when it does, no one will be able to stop it. See, God doesn't need weeks to turn things around. He doesn't need approval from men. He's not held back by protocols, paperwork, or permissions. When heaven decides it's your season, doors open without explanation. Chains fall without keys. Enemies scatter without warning. Why? Because God's authority is supreme. That's what makes the shift so shocking. Those who had power lose it. Those who were ignored become impossible to overlook. And those who walked in quiet obedience become vessels of public demonstration. Faith positions you, but divine timing launches you. This is why it's critical not to give up when things look stagnant. The moment you're thinking of quitting could be the exact moment when God is preparing the shift. Look at Paul and Silas. One moment they were locked in a prison, no hope, no light. And then, boom, an earthquake, a breakthrough, and an open door. That's not dramatic writing, that's divine execution. Your breakthrough may not come with warning. It might interrupt your despair. It might knock on your door while you're praying, fasting, or even weeping. But when it comes, it changes everything. So hold on, chosen one. The shift is coming. The same God who brought sudden justice in Egypt, Babylon, and Jerusalem is the same God moving in your story. You won't need to explain it. You won't need to defend it. Because when God acts, it speaks louder than anything your enemies ever said. Now let me ask you something straight. Have you ever seen someone try to destroy you and end up destroying themselves instead? Could it be that what you went through wasn't punishment, but proof that you're one of God's chosen? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your story. Your testimony might be the encouragement someone else needs right now. And if this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's under attack, who needs to know that faith, the Bible, Jesus Christ, and the power of God still protect His chosen ones. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications so you never miss another spiritual revelation like this one. We're building a community of warriors who walk by faith and live for truth. And before you go, click on the next video that's appearing on your screen right now. It dives even deeper into how divine justice operates when you least expect it. You're not just watching videos here. You're stepping into revelation. God bless you. I'm Jose, and I'll see you in the next one.